Then in the New Testament, we see God our Savior in action. This Old Testament God, who is a Savior, sends Christ, his only begotten Son. He allows Christ to die as a substitute, just what he promised in the Garden of Eden, that Jesus would be bruised by the serpent, but in the process would crush the serpent's head. And that message of the substitute of Christ, his substitutionary atonement on the cross, then God raises him, seats him at his right hand, and sends out his apostles. And what do they say? Well, here are a couple more verses. These are beautiful verses about God as Savior. And we need to realize that to understand the book of Revelation, remember that the one that is pouring out all of these, unfurling the seals, blowing the trumpets, and pouring out the bowls of wrath is a Savior. And he has a reason to do this. And this is what Paul said, "For this is good and acceptable in the sight of God, our Savior." Now, what does this loving, just God want? Verse 4. "Who desires all men to be saved and to come to the knowledge of the truth." That is what you see all the way through Revelation. That is what we're going to trace. When God is pulling out the stops, shaking every inch of the earth, at the same time, he's deploying the greatest single missionary force ever assembled, 144,000. He is sending out 2 witnesses that testify of who he is. And then as everything is falling apart and just like everything is crumbling before people's eyes, he sends an angel in low earth orbit, loudly preaching the gospel. Why? Because God our Savior desires all men to be saved and come to the knowledge of the truth. And Titus reinforces that. When the kindness and the love of God our Savior. See that essential description of God. Well, Revelation portrays our God of love all the way through. If you just start in Revelation, look at chapter 7, the first 8 verses. God deploys his 144,000 evangelist servants. Do you remember Jesus promised on earth in Matthew 24:14 that the gospel is going to go everywhere on the planet, and every generation is in charge of taking the gospel into all the world. But when God does it, he doesn't just do it online with radio and print or showing videos. He sends out 144,000 sealed, what we would say invulnerable, they cannot be destroyed people. The beast, the devil, and the demons can't touch them. And they personally do a soul-winning conversation with people. And when he does that, look what happens in chapter 7, verse 9. After these things, look at the proximity. He deploys the 144,000 Jewish missionary evangelists, and after these things, verse 9, behold, a great multitude which no one could number. So what's the net result of the God who sends? Well, up on the slide, you see it. God the Savior saves a countless multitude out of the Holocaust of the tribulation. And what people does he save? No one can number them, of all nations, all tribes, all peoples, all tongues. They stand before the throne, before the Lamb. They're clothed with white robes. They have palm branches in their hands, and they're testifying of their great God. The proximity of the deployment and this crowd communicates the fact that there is success, that there is a countless multitude that responds to the gospel. And it doesn't end there. God sends the 2 witnesses in chapter 11. If you turn over to chapter 14, we see the recall of the 144,000. I don't know if it's halftime or if they're done, but they're standing with the Lamb in chapter 14, verse 1. On Mount Zion, commentators differ whether it's earthly Zion and they're having a meeting in Jerusalem and he's resending them out, or if it's heavenly Zion, they're in heaven. But they're together, the 144,000. But when they're standing there together and rejoicing in what the Lord has done, look what the Lord does in chapter 14, verse 6. That's the next point up there. God the Savior, who sent the 144,000, who saved countless multitudes through them, who sends the 2 witnesses to crisscross and testify of him, now sends an angel preaching the everlasting gospel. Now look what's so interesting about the gospel in verse 6. Another angel flying in the midst of heaven. Now, the midst of heaven is how you describe the sun in mid-heaven. Kind of like noonday sun. It's kind of like you can't avoid it. It's right there, right overhead, blazing down. That's like this low orbit angel. So he's up there circling the earth where everybody can see him no matter where they are. And look what it says. His commission from God is, he has the everlasting gospel to preach to those who dwell on the earth. And what is his course as he flies around? He goes to every nation, to every tribe, to every tongue, to every people. God is a Savior. God is wanting to seek and save the lost. God has his arms stretched out during the horrors of all the plagues, of all the judgments of the tribulation. He's not sitting up there enjoying the demise of these helpless creatures. They have nowhere to go, kind of like scampering around when you throw a log in a fire filled with termites and they come out to perish. He rather is up there, arms out, and saving countless multitudes. See, that's the perspective we need to understand in the tribulation. But look at the gospel, the everlasting gospel. If I was doing a paper on the everlasting gospel and didn't have verse 6 and 7, I would not include these elements. Look what it says. Saying with a loud voice, here's God preaching the gospel through this angel, fear God. Now that's good, it resonates. The last two verses of Ecclesiastes, fear God and keep his commandments. It's the whole duty of man. Okay, fear God, give glory to him. And God is glorified when we confess we're sinners, when we confess we're lost. So that's good. Yep. Tracking, that's in the Bible. But look at this next part. For the hour of his judgment has come, and worship him